He thought announcing our divorce at our daughter's birthday party would humiliate me. What he didn't know was that I had been planning my own announcement too. Hi, I'm Laura Bennett, and today I'm telling you the story of how I went from nearly losing everything to taking back the life and the company he tried to steal from me. So grab your coffee, sit close, because trust me, you're gonna want to hear how this one ends. I still remember the weight of the door handle as I pushed it open that morning, my heart hammering louder than the quiet click it made. 6 years away, and everything looked both painfully familiar and jarringly foreign. The smell of fresh coffee in the lobby, the sharp clack of heels on marble floors, the soft hum of conversations behind glass walls, all of it wrapped around me like a memory too tight to breathe in. I adjusted my blazer with shaking fingers, wondering if the fabric could hide how out of place I already felt. I told myself it didn't matter. I had earned my seat at this table, brick by brick, before motherhood ever took me away. I wasn't a guest here. I was a founder. I forced a smile, but it cracked at the edges like porcelain. Victor greeted me with a half hug, stiff and obligatory, as if he were welcoming a distant relative he barely remembered. "Laura!" he said, like my name was a question mark. Around us, a few employees glanced up from their desks, some with polite smiles, others with faint curiosity. Or was it pity? I couldn't tell anymore. "Welcome back," he added, but the warmth I craved wasn't there. Just duty. Just a politeness that left me colder than silence would have. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat and nodded, stepping deeper into the building I had once called home. This was supposed to be a fresh start. I didn't know yet it would be a battlefield. My new office was a glass box tucked between bigger glass boxes, a far cry from the corner Sweet Victor and I used to share. A silent message, loud and clear: "You're here, but you don't belong." I ran my fingers along the clean desk, the unfamiliar leather chair, the view of the parking lot instead of the skyline. Every detail was a wound stitched with invisible thread. I set down my bag, drawing a deep breath to steady myself. "Focus, Laura. This isn't about pride. This is about reclaiming what you built." I sat down and opened my laptop, the screen's glow reflecting a face I barely recognized, older, tougher, but still carrying a flicker of the woman who had once dreamed big under these same fluorescent lights. The first few weeks passed in a fog of forced smiles and small betrayals. Meetings I wasn't invited to. Projects I was looped in only after decisions had been made. My opinions were politely heard and promptly ignored. It was like trying to shout through a pane of glass no one else could see. I would drive home, grip the steering wheel at red lights, and wonder if I was making a mistake. Maybe I had outgrown this place. Or worse, maybe it had outgrown me. But every time I looked at the old logo on the building, I remembered the night Victor and I sketched it out on a napkin, dreaming about the future we'd build. I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I saw it for the first time. A spreadsheet left open on a conference room projector, rows of numbers that didn't add up. It was subtle, almost too subtle for anyone but someone who lived and breathed finances like I did. Transfers, allocations, shadow expenses tucked neatly into departments that barely existed. My stomach knotted as I stared, frozen. Victor had always handled the final books after I stepped back, but I had trusted him. My husband. My partner. My mistake. I closed my notebook with trembling hands and smiled at the interns setting up coffee, pretending like I hadn't seen a thing. Pretending was something I was getting good at. Days blurred into nights as I quietly pulled thread after thread. Expense reports, meeting minutes, vendor contracts that didn't match payments. At home, I would sit at the kitchen table after Emily went to bed, scanning through files Victor never thought I'd question. The betrayal unfolded slowly, sickeningly, like watching a house you build catch fire one timber at a time. Somewhere in those late hours, I found something worse. Messages. Hidden inside a cloud folder Victor had accidentally synced to his personal drive. Messages to someone named Rachel. Someone who wasn't me. Promises. Secrets. Plans. My hands shook so violently I could barely scroll. I read until the words blurred. Then I read them again. Rachel worked for us. I remembered her now, bright-eyed, ambitious, eager to please. She had smiled at me in the break room just yesterday, offered me coffee with a side of betrayal. A cold rage settled into my bones, heavy and sharp. This wasn't just a personal failure. It was a professional assassination. Victor wasn't planning to leave me, not exactly. He was planning to erase me, to rewrite the company's history without my name attached. I could almost hear him saying it. Laura stepped away. She lost touch. She doesn't understand the business anymore. A perfect story for the board, for the investors, for our friends. Except it wasn't true, and I wasn't about to let it become true. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I gathered screenshots, bank statements, meeting recordings. I reached out to a lawyer, one specializing in corporate divorces, a phrase that felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I started planning something I had never imagined I'd need. An escape, a counterattack, a way to protect not just myself but the company we had built together. It was like planting landmines in a field I once danced across barefoot. Every night, when I kissed Emily goodnight, I wondered what she would think of me if she ever knew. Would she see me as strong or broken? Would she understand that sometimes survival looks nothing like heroism? And so I waited while Victor grew bolder, waited while Rachel's presence at meetings became more pronounced, her laughter a little too loud, waited as rumors slithered through the office like smoke no one wanted to name. I waited for the right moment, the perfect stage, the one Victor himself would set without even knowing it. And when the invitation arrived, a party at our house, friends and colleagues gathered to celebrate Emily's birthday, I smiled for the first time in months. Because I knew exactly how the story would end. And it wouldn't be with me leaving quietly. The day of Emily's birthday arrived wrapped in a crisp, bright blue sky, the kind of day that dared you to believe in happiness. I spent the morning stringing balloons along the banister, arranging cupcakes on silver trays, tying pastel ribbons around stacks of party favors. From the outside, it looked like the life I had fought to build was still intact. From the inside, every knot I tied felt like a countdown. I could hear Victor laughing with friends in the backyard, see Rachel weaving through the crowd like a snake dressed in sunshine. I smiled and posed for pictures, hugged neighbors, accepted compliments. Every move rehearsed, every breath calculated. When Victor called me into the study, I knew the moment had come. He asked me to bring Emily's godparents, a few of the board members, and some of our oldest friends into the room. His voice was light, almost giddy, like a magician about to unveil a trick. I wiped my hands on my jeans, feeling the hidden weight of the envelope tucked into my purse. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old books, a place once filled with whispered dreams and late-night strategy sessions. Now it felt like a courtroom. I stood near the back as Victor gathered everyone's attention, clearing his throat theatrically. I felt Emily's presence somewhere outside. Her laughter carried on the spring breeze. "I have an important announcement," Victor began, his voice swelling with self-importance. He looked straight at me, and for a moment, I saw the man I had married and the stranger he had become. "Laura and I have decided to separate," he said, pausing for effect. Gasps, murmurs, a collective intake of breath. "And given that Laura has been absent from the company for so long, I believe it's in everyone's best interest that she step away permanently. I've offered to buy her shares so she can focus on new adventures." His smile was a blade wrapped in velvet. I heard the crack of my own heart and forced my hands to stay still. I was not here to break. I was here to end this. There was a beat of silence, thick and sticky, as everyone turned to me, expecting tears, maybe. A scene. A public collapse. Victor's mistake was thinking I would react like the woman he remembered, the woman who once begged him to stay, who once sacrificed her name on contracts just to keep peace at home. That woman was gone. I stepped forward, steady as a tide, and pulled the envelope from my purse. "Before we make any decisions," I said, my voice low but sharp enough to cut the tension, "there are a few things everyone should know." I placed the envelope on the desk between us. Victor's smile faltered for the first time. I turned to face the room, my voice growing stronger with every word. For several months, I have been documenting financial irregularities within Bennett Designs, I said, scanning the faces of the men and women who once toasted our victories. Funds misappropriated, unauthorized transactions, personal expenditures disguised as business costs. Gasps again, this time tinged with anger. Victor opened his mouth, but I raised a hand, silencing him. Furthermore, I continued, there is evidence of an inappropriate relationship between Victor and an employee, compromising both the integrity and the reputation of our company. Rachel's face drained of color. A champagne flute slipped from someone's hand and shattered on the floor. Victor stepped forward, blustering. This isn't the time or place. No, I interrupted, my voice cold as steel. It's the perfect time, and it's exactly the right place. I turned to the board members, the investors, the people who had believed in us from the beginning. As a founding partner and current shareholder, I said, I am calling for a vote of no confidence in Victor Bennett as CEO, effective immediately. The words hung there, electric. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, almost in unison, heads began to nod. Murmured agreements rose like a tide. Victor's face crumpled, then hardened into something ugly. But it was too late. The avalanche had already started. The vote was swift and brutal. One by one, hands were raised. Even Victor's oldest friends, men he golfed with, traveled with, turned against him. Betrayal cuts both ways, and Victor had wielded his knife too recklessly. I watched him sag under the weight of his own undoing, the golden boy finally tarnished beyond repair. Rachel slipped out of the room quietly, her heels clicking down the hallway like a ticking clock. I wondered if Victor even noticed. I wondered if he would, later, when the silence around him became too loud to bear. He turned to me, searching for something in my face, pity maybe, redemption, but I had nothing left to give. When it was over, I walked out onto the deck where Emily was opening presents, laughing with her friends. For a moment, I just watched her, the sunlight in her hair, the joy untainted by the storm that had raged behind closed doors. I walked over and knelt beside her, pulling her into a hug so tight she squealed. "Happy birthday, my sweet girl," I whispered, pressing my forehead to hers. In that moment, the weight of everything I had lost didn't matter. What mattered was what I had saved. Myself, my daughter, our future. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in years. The war was over, but the real rebuilding had just begun. As I turned back toward the house, I caught a glimpse of Victor through the window, alone now, shoulders slumped, the king without a kingdom. I should have felt satisfaction. Maybe I would later. For now, there was only a deep, aching sadness for what could have been, and a fierce, unshakable hope for what was still to come. I slipped my hand into Emily's small one, and together we stepped into the sunlight. The house felt hollow after everyone left, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Plates stacked in the sink, half-empty wine glasses abandoned on side tables, wrapping paper crumpled in colorful piles. I moved through the wreckage, slowly savoring the silence. Emily was upstairs with her best friend, giggling over presents and birthday cake, blissfully unaware of the war her mother had just survived. I sank into the oversized armchair by the fireplace, exhaustion seeping into my bones. My body ached in places I didn't know could ache, but somewhere, buried deep beneath the fatigue, a tiny ember of peace flickered to life. The front door slammed with a violence that shook the windows. Victor's footsteps pounded through the foyer, each step a warning shot. I stayed seated, refusing to meet rage with fear. He stormed into the living room, red-faced and breathing hard, clutching the crumpled envelope I had given him. "What the hell was that, Laura?" he spat, his voice hoarse with fury. "You blindsided me." I tilted my head slightly, studying him like a stranger at a zoo exhibit. "You expected to blindside me," I said quietly. I simply returned the favor. His hands curled into fists at his sides, the veins in his neck bulging. But he didn't move closer. He knew better. "You destroyed everything," he hissed, pacing like a caged animal. "Everything we built." I almost laughed at the hypocrisy, but the sound caught in my throat. You destroyed it the moment you chose lies over loyalty, I said instead. Victor stopped pacing and stared at me, his chest heaving. I'm not walking away from this empty-handed, he growled. I'll fight you. I'll take you to court. I'll make sure you lose everything. His words were knives meant to scare me, but they barely scratched the surface. I had already survived the deeper cuts. I stood up slowly, meeting his glare without flinching. You're welcome to try, I said, my voice like ice snapping. For a long moment, we just stood there, two ruins, facing each other across the battlefield we had once called home. Finally, Victor turned away with a low curse, storming toward the kitchen. I heard the scrape of drawers, the clatter of silverware, the thud of cabinets slammed shut. Searching for something to hold on to, maybe. Searching for anything he could still control. I walked upstairs without looking back, each step lighter than the last. In Emily's room, the girls were braiding friendship bracelets, their laughter spilling into the hallway like sunlight through a broken window. I leaned against the doorframe for a second, just watching them. Innocence. Hope. The reasons I had fought so hard. That night, after the house finally settled into uneasy quiet, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. I reviewed every document, every legal paper, every contingency plan. I had spent months building this fortress around myself and Emily, brick by brick, while pretending everything was fine. It was a lonely, brutal kind of preparation, like knitting a parachute while free-falling. But now, looking at the layers of protection I had assembled, I realized something. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was ready to live. My hands trembled slightly as I closed the laptop. Not from fear. From relief. For the first time in years, the future wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Victor moved out 2 days later. No goodbye. No final conversation. Just a text message, and the sound of tires crunching down the driveway. I watched from the upstairs window as he loaded suitcases into his car, Rachel's absence screaming louder than any accusation. She hadn't stuck around long once the truth came out. Loyalty built on lies crumbles faster than anyone expects. Part of me wanted to feel triumphant, to savor his humiliation. But mostly I just felt empty, like grieving someone who had already died long before the body was buried. I closed the curtains without waving. Some chapters deserve to end in silence. The company's board called an emergency meeting the following week. In the sterile light of the conference room, I presented my vision for Bennett Designs: transparency, innovation, rebuilding trust from the ground up. I outlined financial reforms, new leadership initiatives, employee empowerment programs. When I finished, there was a moment of heavy, thoughtful silence. Then applause, slow at first, then gathering strength. I blinked back tears as I accepted their votes of confidence, not because I needed validation, but because it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I thought was lost forever. This wasn't Victor's company anymore. It was mine. Ours. The real builders. At home that night, Emily curled up beside me on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder. I'm proud of you, Mom, she said sleepily, her voice muffled against my sweater. I brushed a strand of hair from her face and kissed her forehead, feeling something inside me finally settle. Maybe I wasn't the same woman who had once built castles with Victor out of dreams and ambition. Maybe that woman had burned away in the fire of betrayal. But what rose from the ashes, strong, scarred, stubborn, was someone I could finally be proud of too. Someone Emily could look up to without hesitation. Someone real. And as I held my daughter close, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing, I realized that sometimes the happiest endings are born from the hardest battles. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you needed to find the things you truly can't live without. The news of Victor's downfall traveled faster than I expected. Within weeks, whispers turned into headlines among our circle of friends and colleagues. Investors pulled their backing. Vendors demanded immediate payments. The few allies Victor had left melted away like ice in the sun. I watched it happen from a distance, feeling an odd mixture of sorrow and grim satisfaction. There was no joy in witnessing a life unravel, even one that had hurt me so deeply. But there was justice. And sometimes, justice isn't pretty. I had fought so hard to survive his betrayal, it only made sense that the truth would survive too. The apartment he rented was small and impersonal, a stark contrast to the sprawling home we had once shared. He texted me once, asking if I could reconsider some of the financial terms. I didn't reply. Some bridges, once burned, aren't meant to be rebuilt. Word eventually reached me through mutual acquaintances that Rachel had left him too. Apparently, she hadn't signed up for a life without luxury. A part of me, the broken, bleeding part, wanted to scream at her hypocrisy. Another part, the part one was learning to listen to, simply whispered, "Let them destroy each other." I had better things to build. Meanwhile, at Bennett Designs, the real work began. I spent long days and longer nights alongside the employees who stayed, the ones who believed in something bigger than Victor's ego. We repainted the walls, redesigned the lobby, rewrote the mission statement. It wasn't just about branding, it was about reclaiming our identity. Every change, no matter how small, felt like scrubbing away another fingerprint he had left behind. There were moments I doubted myself, of course. Moments when the shadows of fear and failure stretched long across the conference tables. But every time I heard someone laugh freely in the hallway, I knew we were healing. Money was tight at first. Without Victor's reckless promises inflating our numbers, we had to rebuild our reputation from the ground up. Some clients left, chasing flashier deals elsewhere. Others stayed, drawn to our new transparency and authenticity. I sent dozens of personal thank you notes, made late-night phone calls to reassure hesitant partners, showed up at meetings with nothing but honesty and a battered heart stitched back together with hope. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy. But it was real. And for the first time in years, I woke up each morning excited to fight for something I believed in. Not for appearances. For the future. At home, Emily thrived in ways I hadn't seen before. She laughed more, slept better, stopped flinching every time a phone buzzed late at night. Sometimes, she would sneak into my room and curl up beside me, just like when she was little. On those nights, I would wrap my arms around her and whisper promises into her hair, promises that this time I would keep. No more pretending. No more sacrificing myself for someone else's comfort. We were a team now, bound not just by blood but by choice. A choice to rise instead of crumble. A choice to love each other louder than the echoes of the past. Victor, predictably, tried to spin the story. To anyone who would listen, he painted himself as the victim of a vindictive ex-wife and a greedy board. Some people believed him, at least for a while. Lies have a way of sounding sweeter than the truth when you're desperate enough to need them. But time, like a relentless tide, wore away at the edges of his narrative. More financial discrepancies surfaced. More skeletons tumbled from his carefully locked closets. By the time the final audit was complete, Victor's reputation was shredded beyond repair. Even those who wanted to believe him couldn't deny the numbers staring them in the face. I received the final legal notice on a rainy Wednesday morning, a simple email confirming the complete transfer of Victor's shares to the remaining board members. His chapter was officially closed. No more claims. No more leverage. No more shadow hanging over my future. I sat in my car outside the courthouse, the rain tapping a soft drumbeat against the windshield, and allowed myself a moment to cry. Not tears of grief this time. Tears of release, of gratitude, of fierce, wild relief. I had walked through fire and come out whole on the other side. Scarred, yes, but whole. And finally free. That night, I took Emily out for dinner, just the two of us. We clinked our glasses of soda together like warriors celebrating a battle hard won. "To new beginnings," she said, eyes sparkling with a wisdom far beyond her years. I smiled, feeling the words settle into my bones like a promise. We were writing a new story now. One built not on borrowed dreams or empty assurances, but on strength, on love, on truth. And maybe, just maybe, on a little bit of stubborn, hard-earned hope. Hope that the best parts of life aren't the ones you plan, but the ones you fight for with everything you have. As we walked back to the car under a canopy of stars, Emily slipped her hand into mine. I squeezed it gently, feeling the future pulse between our joined palms. Whatever storms waited ahead, whatever battles we still had to fight, we would face them together. Not as victims, not as survivors, but as warriors who had learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't winning against someone else. It's refusing to let them define who you are. The first few months felt like trying to rebuild a cathedral from the ashes with my bare hands. Every day brought a new challenge. A supplier demanding payment terms Victor had promised and never honored. A project delayed because of past mismanagement. A client hesitant to renew their contract. There were nights I collapsed into bed, fully dressed, my mind buzzing with numbers and contingency plans. Doubt crept in like a draft under a locked door, whispering that maybe Victor had been right. Maybe I wasn't strong enough for this. But then I would see Emily's drawings taped to the fridge, pictures of castles and queens, and remember who I was fighting for. I refused to lead the way Victor had. No more closed doors, no more secrets layered under smiles. Every Monday morning, I held open meetings with the team, laying out our goals and our hurdles honestly. Sometimes the news was good, sometimes it wasn't, but it was always real. Little by little, the atmosphere changed. Where fear once lingered like smoke, trust began to grow. I started seeing it in the way people spoke up in meetings, in the way ideas flowed without the constant need to impress or appease. It wasn't just my company anymore. It was ours, and that made all the difference. One afternoon, sitting in the sunlit conference room, I caught my reflection in the glass wall. For a second, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Hair pulled back in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes, sleeves rolled up. Not polished, not perfect, but alive. Fiercely, beautifully alive. I smiled, a real smile this time, and turned back to the team discussing a new sustainable design project. They weren't just looking at me for approval, they were looking at me as a leader. As someone who had earned her place not by force or fear, but by surviving what tried to break her. Of course, not every battle was won overnight. There were setbacks that left me questioning everything. A key investor pulling out unexpectedly, a promising project collapsing under bureaucratic delays. There were mornings I sat in my car outside the office, forehead against the steering wheel, willing myself not to cry before walking inside. Healing isn't linear. Growth isn't painless. But somewhere along the way, I learned that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting up, even when every muscle screams for you to stay down. It's about choosing hope when fear would be easier. And it's about knowing you're worth fighting for. Victor tried once more to reinsert himself into my life. A weak email sent at midnight, full of half-hearted apologies and vague offers to help with the company if I ever needed advice. I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling a strange, distant pity for the man who had once been my entire world. Without anger, without venom, I deleted the message without replying. Some doors are meant to be reopened. Some scars are meant to be touched. And some lessons are too costly to forget. I owed it to myself and to the woman I had become to leave the past exactly where it belonged. Slowly, Bennett Designs began to rebuild its reputation. We landed a mid-sized hotel renovation project, then a small eco-housing development. Nothing flashy, nothing that made headlines. But steady, honest. Ours. Every completed project was a stitch closing a wound. Every new client meeting was a reminder that credibility, once shattered, could be rebuilt, one truth at a time. There were days I still second-guessed every decision, days I missed the naive girl who thought love and loyalty were enough to protect a dream. But there were also days I stood in the office doorway, watching my team laugh and build and dream, and knew we were doing something right. Emily blossomed too. She joined the debate team, started writing for the school newspaper, even talked about studying architecture someday. Watching her grow into her own strength was like watching the sun rise after a lifetime of storms. Sometimes, late at night, she would sit at the kitchen table with me, both of us working quietly side by side. No words needed, just the shared space, the shared understanding that we were building a new legacy, not one handed to us, but one we had fought for. Brick by brick, promise by promise, and for the first time, I believe we deserved it. every single piece of it. The anniversary of Victor's public downfall came and went without fanfare. No texts, no calls, no pangs of sadness, just a quiet Saturday spent hiking with Emily, our laughter echoing through the woods. I paused at the top of a hill, catching my breath, watching Emily race ahead with fearless joy. She turned back, waving for me to catch up, and as I pushed forward, lungs burning, heart pounding, I realized something simple and beautiful. I wasn't chasing the past anymore. I was running toward the future. My future. One I had built with blistered hands and an unbroken spirit. One no one could ever take away again. That night, curled up with a cup of tea and a book I wasn't really reading, I allowed myself to dream a little bigger. Maybe opening a second office someday. Maybe speaking at conferences about resilience and leadership. Maybe teaching Emily not just to dream, but to fight for her dreams without apology. The possibilities stretched out before me like a road paved in stars. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the darkness anymore. I had walked through it and found my own light. 6 months later, Bennett Designs didn't just survive, it flourished. Our team grew, our projects expanded, our reputation mended itself stitch by careful stitch. There were days I walked through the office and had to blink back tears at the sound of easy laughter, the sight of collaboration humming like electricity in the walls. We had built something beautiful from the ruins. Not perfect, not flashy, but real. And real, I learned, was better than perfect could ever hope to be. I carried the scars of the past, sure, but I carried something else too now. A quiet, unshakable pride. The kind no one can give you. The kind you have to earn. One evening, I stood in the doorway of our newly expanded design studio, watching Emily sketch ideas on a whiteboard with the junior architects. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, just like mine used to be. Her voice, strong and clear, carried across the room as she explained her vision for a new community center project. She caught my eye and grinned, a spark of joy lighting up her whole face. And in that moment, I realized this was the legacy I was leaving behind. Not the name on the building, not the titles or accolades, but the courage to dream without apology, the courage to rebuild when everything falls apart. Victor's name became little more than a whisper over time, a cautionary tale people rarely mentioned, a shadow fading into irrelevance. Occasionally, I would hear updates through old friends. Another failed business venture, another bridge burned. I didn't wish him pain. I didn't wish him anything at all. Indifference, I discovered, is colder and cleaner than hatred. It frees you. It lets you live without chains. Victor had written himself out of my story long before he realized he was only ever a chapter, not the whole book. And I had more pages to fill, pages he would never touch again. A few months after Emily graduated high school, we stood together on the deck of our newly renovated home. A house I had once feared I would lose, now filled with warmth and second chances. She slipped her hand into mine as we watched the sunset bleed gold and purple across the sky. "You know," she said softly, "everything he tried to take from us, you gave back twice as much." I swallowed hard, fighting the lump in my throat. Maybe I hadn't protected her from every pain. Maybe I hadn't been able to keep every storm at bay. But I had taught her something better, how to dance in the rain without ever losing herself. I opened my consultancy later that year, a small firm dedicated to helping women rebuild after betrayal, after loss, after life kicked them hard enough to make them forget who they were. The first client who walked through my door shook with fear the way I once had. And when I looked into her eyes, I saw myself, the woman who had once thought survival meant silence. I sat across from her, steady and sure, and promised her what no one had promised me, that surviving wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. That her scars weren't proof of failure, they were proof she had fought and survived. At night, sometimes, I would sit on the porch with a cup of tea and let the cool air wrap around me. The silence didn't scare me anymore. It wasn't empty. It was full of things unspoken, battles fought, lessons learned, love reclaimed. I would close my eyes and breathe it in, the smell of cut grass, The faint laughter of neighbors drifting on the breeze, the slow, steady heartbeat of a life rebuilt on truth. There was peace in the simple things now, in knowing I didn't need anyone else to define my worth, in knowing I had saved myself when no one else could. Looking back, I realized that the greatest revenge had never been destroying Victor. It wasn't about proving him wrong or watching him fall. It was this, standing here, whole and free, building a life so rich, so authentic, so unapologetically mine that his absence didn't even cast a shadow. The life we had dreamed about once was gone, but the life I had built with my own two hands was better, not because it was easier, but because it was real. It was forged in fire, shaped by storms, and strengthened by every tear, every heartbreak, every ounce of stubborn hope I refused to let die. If you had told me back then, in the wreckage of my old life, that I would someday be grateful for the betrayal, I would have laughed through my tears. But now, standing here, I understand. Sometimes life has to break you to rebuild you stronger. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who unintentionally set you free. And sometimes the end you feared is really just the beginning you never dared to imagine. So here's to the endings that feel like death but turn out to be rebirths. Here's to the dreams shattered into a million pieces, and the stronger, fiercer ones we build from the ruins. And here's to the quiet, stubborn, beautiful belief that no matter who tries to bury you, you can and you will rise. If you like this story, leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and if you want to help me keep telling these stories, you can buy me a coffee. The link is there in the first pinned comment. Every cup helps me keep bringing you more stories.